So chapter 15 is one of two chapters focused on the immune system, and it focuses on what's called innate immunity. And so we have what's called innate resistance to microorganisms. And it's a non-specific kind of resistance, meaning it's a resistance to all kinds of things in general that you might encounter, things that might contaminate your skin, things that are in the environment all the time. And so chapter 15 is all about innate resistance, which includes what we call the first and second lines of defense. In chapter 16, we'll look at specific resistances to specific pathogens, which is mediated by your white blood cells, and that is called the third line of defense. So first of all, you should consider that humans have resistance to a lot of pathogens. For example, a plant pathogen, meaning a pathogen that might infect a plant, could not infect you. A pathogen that infects other animals often cannot infect you. A phage cannot infect you. And so you have a general resistance to a lot of pathogens just because either there's no receptor on your cells that can be recognized by the pathogen, or the pathogen cannot attach to your cells, or your growth conditions in your body are not right for that pathogen survival. And so that's a very general type of resistance, something we probably don't even think about that often. Now, for pathogens that potentially could infect you, because they are human pathogens, we have what's called the first line of defense. And the first line of defense is primarily your skin and mucous membranes. Mucous membranes refer to the surface that covers your respiratory system, your digestive system, and parts of your urinary and reproductive systems. And so these are the guard against things getting into your body. They're the first line of defense is, the outer surface of all your body. And so thinking of skin in particular, you have two layers of skin. Epidermis, which is a lot of dead cells, many tightly packed layers. Not too many pathogens can get through these layers. When you shed your dead skin, any pathogens that might be holding on to those dead skin cells are shed. And you do have what are called dendritic cells. Dendritic cells do phagocytosis on pathogens. They phagocytize pathogens, and that engulfing them destroys them. And those cells are called dendritic cells. There are other cells that are phagocytes throughout the body, but in your skin they're called dendritic cells. Then if you go a little bit deeper down in your skin, you get to the layer called dermis. Dermis has a very strong extracellular matrix of collagen fibers that is holding the tissue together and prevents the skin from being easily broken. And so when you rub up against something or you bump against something, your skin doesn't just split apart because the collagen holds it together. And I just like this picture because it's a close-up of the epidermal cells, which are mostly dead, and you can see they're very flat. Since this is a scanning electron micrograph, you can't see inside the cells to see the nucleus, but you can see the rough surface of the cells. So the skin has secretions that help to defend or help to prevent pathogens from being able to get past it. So perspiration contains salt, and we know that some pathogens, some organisms cannot grow in the presence of salt. There are antimicrobial peptides, which act as a type of antibacterial or antimicrobial chemical. And then you have lysozyme, which we've mentioned before, destroys the cell wall of bacteria. And those things are all secreted in the sweat by the sweat glands. You also have sebum, which are oil glands in your skin. And the oil glands just help your skin to stay intact. When your skin is nice and has a little bit of oil on it, it is nice and flexible and it doesn't just split. Now, when you wash your hands too much and you remove a lot of that oil, your hands get very dry, and sometimes they split just from being too dry. So if your hands get very dry, especially if you're a healthcare provider and you're washing your hands a lot, you might want to think about some very light oils that can be purchased to put on your skin. I use some almond oil, some very light oils, maybe some grapeseed oil, just a tiny bit added to the skin really helps. And the sebum also lowers the skin pH, and that's inhibitory to many bacteria and microorganisms. Now, the mucous membranes is the layer of tissue that lines your body cavities that have interaction with the environment. So the inside of your mouth, into your pharynx, the inside of your nose, and so that's all lined by mucous membranes. And mucous membranes typically secrete something, some kind of secretion that contains antimicrobial elements. So you have the epithelial layer, which is the surface layer of your mucous membrane. It tends to be pretty thin. Unlike the skin, the epithelial layer, the top layer, is living cells. They are tightly packed like the skin. They do shed like the skin, but they are living cells and they tend to be covered with some kind of secretion to keep them moist. Then underneath the epithelium you have the connective tissue that holds the epithelium together and supports it. And so the secretions that you might see coming from the epithelial layer helps to decrease the amount of pathogens that are growing there. So this is just showing, like I was mentioning, one main area that pathogens tend to enter through is your mouth, your sinus, your nasal passages, down the back of your throat. And so this is all lined with mucous membranes that have a lot of secretions that help to kill or prevent growth of microorganisms. So just a comparison of skin and mucous membranes in terms of both of them act as the first line of defense. And the reason this is nonspecific is any pathogen is blocked from entering your body at this point, at the skin or at the mucous membrane. So that's why it's nonspecific. The secretions are kind of mentioned down here. Mucus is a secretion. So there are various secretions. You don't need to memorize all of these, but both of the layers, both of these, the mucous membrane and the skin, has a constant shedding, so that's something you should pay attention to. And the cells are tightly packed, so I would pay attention to that. And so that forms that first barrier. All right. Your eyes produce tears, which contain lysozyme, like your sweat. And so that destroys bacteria that may be trying to get in. And frankly, I get things in my eye a reasonable amount. And so if you have a little scratch on your eye, that can get infected pretty quickly. And so having that lysozyme is helpful. The tear ducts drain out into where your mucous membranes are. So you don't need to memorize the anatomy of this structure. But the eyes secrete tears, which are salty as well and have the lysozyme in them. Now, keeping a healthy microbiome is important. So we're talking about, like, taking probiotics or having a good diet or eating yogurt or these types of things increase the microbial antagonism that can occur mainly in your digestive system. Your digestive system is an important first line of defense because, like I said, lots of pathogens come into your mouth. And they can either go into your lungs, but they can also go down into your digestive system. And so by having a normal, healthy microbiome, you make it hard for pathogens to get a niche or an opportunity to start to over-reproduce. Because the normal microbes consume most of the nutrients, take up most of the space, and just in general create an unfavorable environment for something new, like a pathogen. They promote overall health because some of your microbes, for example, E. coli produces vitamin K, and stimulates the second line of defense, which we will talk about in a minute. So your digestive system is an important part of the first line of defense, and the secretions of the digestive system are part of that. Saliva contains lysozyme, like many of your other secretions. Stomach acid is very acidic, pH about 2, and so that kills microorganisms by denaturing their enzymes and proteins. Bile, that's a very nasty material that comes it's made by your liver, stored in your gallbladder, and if you've ever had food poisoning and you throw up to the point where you're just throwing up kind of a greenish yellowish liquid, that's probably the bile. And it's hard for organisms to live in the presence of bile. When you defecate or when you vomit, you're eliminating microorganisms from your digestive system. And so there's all sorts of ways that your digestive system gets rid of microorganisms. Your urine, because it flows out, gets rid of anything that is potentially trying to creep into your bladder. You have if you're female, vaginal secretions and menstrual flow help keep things moving outward, and prostate secretion for male. So the second line of defense will be covered in the next lecture segment.